They shoved an old man into the street and filmed it. They didn't know who he was, but someone watching did. Memorial Park, Pensacola, Florida, usually buzzed with laughter, the soft buzz of cicadas, the aroma of espresso wafting from the vendor carts, and the distant drone of traffic blending with the murmur of families gathered under spreading oaks. On this particular Saturday, the air was thick with the kind of early summer heat that made shadows feel like small mercies and every movement seem a bit slower. Tourists mingled with locals. A saxophonist played quietly near the fountain, his notes floating out toward the memorial plaques lining the walkways. At the edge of the park, an old man shuffled along the curb. He wore a faded navy ball cap, jeans 2 sizes too big, cinched with a cracked leather belt, and a blue flannel shirt, button wrong, at the bottom. His name, though few knew it yet, was Eldon Briggs. 88 years old, a thin, wiry frame that time had bent but not quite broken. In his right hand, he leaned hard on a cane, a battered thing, its rubber tip nearly worn through. He paused every few steps, his gaze scanning the park, lost in memories. A trio of teenagers skated along the sidewalk, their laughter cut above the rest, loud, nervous, a little mean. One, a tall kid in a hoodie with messy hair and an iPhone out, was filming the others doing tricks by the curb. When they spotted Eldon, something shifted. The tallest one nudged his friend, a signal, a grin stretching across his face. "Yo, get this," the kid with the phone whispered, angling the camera. "Watch what he does." Eldon stepped forward to cross, eyes fixed on the crosswalk light blinking orange. He didn't see the boy sweep toward him on his skateboard. In a sudden, sharp motion, the teen slammed his shoulder into Eldon's back, hard enough to send the old man stumbling off the curb and into the street. There was a horrible, heart-stopping moment as Eldon flailed, his cane snapping beneath his weight, his hat tumbling away. He hit the asphalt hard, a cry torn from his lips, the sound drowned out by a car's horn as a sedan screeched to a halt just a few feet away. Eldon's elbow scraped the pavement, blood welling instantly. His cane, now in 2 useless pieces, rolled towards the gutter. The teens burst into laughter. The iPhone kid kept filming, circling for a better shot. "Damn, you see that? Man, he went flying. Upload that, bro. Upload it." People stared. A few tourists lifted their own phones, uncertain, some snapping pictures, others only watching. A little girl clutched her mother's hand and pointed, her eyes wide. Bystanders murmured. Some shook their heads. Nobody moved. The crowd's unease was a living thing, shame and disbelief, and the raw, sticky discomfort of seeing something you know is wrong, but not wanting to get involved. A couple sitting on a bench whispered, one biting her lip. 2 men near the coffee cart argued in hushed tones about whether to help. Eldon, dazed, tried to push himself up. His arm trembled, blood dripping down to pool on the hot pavement. The world seemed to shrink to the sound of laughter behind him, the relentless gaze of a dozen cell phone cameras. For a moment, it looked like he might not get up at all. From the far side of the coffee stand, a man watched. He wore a white button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up, a small, discreet navy pin gleaming on his chest. His hair was salt and pepper, neatly cropped, and his eyes, sharp, assessing, hard to read, didn't leave Eldon for a second. He sipped his coffee, set it aside, and strode across the park. As he moved, something in his bearing, shoulders squared, back straight, made space open around him. He moved with purpose, not the hesitation of the onlookers, but with calm authority. The teens, still laughing, slowed as he drew near. He knelt beside Eldon, ignoring the stares, ignoring the phone pointed his way. He helped Eldon to his feet, one arm steady at the elbow. Eldon winced but straightened, wobbly but proud. The man looked him over, eyes lingering on the navy hat, the blood, the trembling hands. Then, in one crisp, practiced motion, the man snapped into a perfect military salute. The crowd stilled, as if time itself paused for a heartbeat. A few people gasped. The teens fell silent, the iPhone camera dipping as the boy's hand shook. Eldon blinked, surprised, then, instinctively, almost reflexively, straightened a bit more. His battered posture softened just a touch. He met the man's eyes, recognition flickering there. Master at arms. Good form, Eldon muttered under his breath. The man nodded, a quiet acknowledgement, and stepped back. He didn't ask questions. He didn't scold or threaten. He simply faded into the crowd, his work done, his point made. Those watching looked at each other, whispers rippling through the gathering. Wait, was that a military salute? Did you see? A tourist filmed Eldon's bleeding arm, zooming in, but Eldon waved off any attempt at help. I'm fine. Leave it, he said, voice hoarse but steady. He stooped to retrieve the broken pieces of his cane, brushing off the dirt with shaking hands. The teens, suddenly unsure, retreated to the edge of the park, their laughter replaced by hurried, nervous whispers. The boy with the iPhone stopped filming. The moment hung in the air, heavy and strange. In that small patch of Memorial Park, an old wound in the fabric of respect and disrespect had been opened for all to see. As Eldon limped away, head high despite the pain, the onlookers parted to let him through. Some nodded, a few looked away, but none would forget what they'd seen. And among them, the man with the navy pin quietly picked up his coffee, eyes scanning the crowd, his mind already working. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over a single contact. Avery, Rhett, MA, 2. He didn't call, not yet, but he would, because sometimes, when you shove the wrong old man, you set in motion a wave you can't possibly see coming. The summer air in Memorial Park felt different now. The laughter of teens had faded, leaving a hush broken only by distant birds and the shuffling steps of the old man as he moved away from the crowd. Eldon Briggs's elbow throbbed. His palm still tingled from the asphalt's rough bite, but he pressed on, clutching the splintered halves of his cane. The blood at his elbow stained his sleeve, and his breathing was shallow, more from humiliation than pain. People on benches craned their necks, watching him limp down the walk. The image was already burning into their minds. An old man, bloodied, alone. Some looked away, embarrassed by their own inaction. Others raised their phones to film, their screens glowing cold and detached, capturing Eldon's slow retreat. Across the street, the man with the navy pin never lost sight of Eldon. The name on his coffee cup, written in quick Sharpie strokes, read Mike. Mike's jaw clenched as he saw the boy's video already spreading from one phone to another, whispers turning into hashtags, amusement shifting to something heavier. He handed his coffee to the barista and strode after Eldon with steady, measured steps, ignoring the ripple of curiosity his presence caused. When Mike reached Eldon, he paused a respectful distance away. For a moment, neither man spoke. Mike looked down at the shattered cane in Eldon's hand, then at the blood running down his arm. He could see Eldon's fingers trembling slightly, but there was a pride in his stance, even now, a resistance that age could not erode. Mike crouched to Eldon's level, his voice low and steady. "Sir, let me help you." Eldon's jaw set stubbornly. "Not your trouble, son." But Mike ignored the protest. With a careful hand, he guided Eldon upright, supporting his weight just enough to steady him. The crowd parted instinctively, drawn in by the unfolding scene, but unsure how to react. Some expected shouting or angry words, but what came next stunned everyone. Mike took a single step back, squared his shoulders, and snapped into a crisp, unmistakable military salute. Perfect form, straight as a mast in a hurricane. The sound of his hand meeting his brow cut through the park, sharper than any reprimand. Eldon's eyes widened, surprise flickering in the lines of his weathered face. He paused, took a breath, and with the stubborn dignity learned over a lifetime, straightened his spine as best he could and returned the salute. Just a subtle lift of his trembling hand, but unmistakable. For those who recognized it, the gesture spoke volumes. Eldon muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Mike to hear, "Master at arms. Good form." Mike nodded, his lips barely twitching into a smile. "Always, Chief." Around them, the atmosphere shifted. The crowd's curiosity turned to awe. A woman in a sun hat gasped, her hand over her heart. A young couple lowered their phones, realizing this was not the viral fodder they expected, but something older and deeper. An unspoken code being honored before their eyes. The three teens stood back, frozen. For the first time, doubt crept into their faces, their bravado wilting under the weight of something they couldn't name. The iPhone boy let his arm drop, the red recording light blinking out. As Mike stepped back, his eyes swept the bystanders, meeting each stare in turn. He didn't raise his voice or scold. He didn't have to. The message was clear. There was a line. And today, they'd all seen it crossed. Eldon, though shaken, gathered himself. He waved off further offers of help from those who finally stepped forward, refusing to become a spectacle. "I'm fine, folks," he rasped, a dry humor flickering through his tone. "Seen worse on a Tuesday." But as he reached for the broken cane, a young boy, a tourist, maybe 8 or 9 years old, stepped up quietly. He handed Eldon the battered navy cap that had flown off in the chaos. Eldon accepted it with a nod, placing it gently back atop his gray hair. The boy's mother tugged him back, but not before the child looked up at Eldon with wide-eyed admiration, as if sensing the truth behind the old man's scars. Behind them, a few people began to whisper, their voices carrying on the humid air. "Did you see that? Was that a military salute? Who is that old man? He must be someone important." As the crowd murmured, a local reporter, camera dangling at her side, arrived breathless. She had missed the initial shove, but now her lens found Eldon's bloodied arm and the small, mysterious drama that had unfolded. Her instincts told her there was a story here, something real, something American in the old sense of the word. But Eldon refused to answer questions. He waved her away, head bowed, intent on finishing his slow walk home. "Let me be, miss," he said, his voice gentler now. "I've got supper waiting." The camera panned to Eldon's bleeding elbow as he limped away, cane broken, but dignity unbowed. Mike watched him go, chest swelling with a quiet pride. As the crowd began to scatter, a few lingered, glancing between Mike and the retreating figure, their own hearts pounding with a strange mixture of shame and admiration. For the first time in years, Memorial Park felt like hallowed ground again, a place where respect was not just a word, but an action, witnessed and remembered. Mike returned to his spot at the coffee stand, but his mind was far from idle. He watched as the teens huddled together, their confidence shaken, a seed of doubt planted deep. And he noticed others, an elderly couple, a pair of joggers, a mother with a stroller, who watched Eldon's retreating back, as if searching for the shape of a story they'd nearly forgotten. Somewhere behind him, a veteran in a faded baseball cap muttered to his wife, "That's what you call real backbone. Bet he's seen some things." As the sky began to darken and the park emptied, the viral video started its journey online. Within hours, it would sweep through feeds and timelines, stirring outrage and sympathy in equal measure. But for those who were there, what lingered wasn't the video or the violence. It was the silence that followed, the hush that fell, when a simple salute transformed a moment of cruelty into one of unexpected honor. And as Eldon Briggs turned the corner, his heart pounding with pain and pride, he whispered to himself words only men of his generation truly understood. Once Navy, always Navy. He would tend to his wounds at home. He would say nothing to the world. But something had shifted, not just for him, but for everyone who had witnessed the power of respect, quiet and unyielding in the face of public shame. And for Mike, the man with the Navy pin, the decision was made. Tonight, he would make the call. He would let the others know. A brother had been disrespected, and that was something the old code could not let stand. Eldon Briggs limped out of Memorial Park, the broken cane a sharp reminder of how quickly the world could turn hostile, even in broad daylight, even in a place meant to honor the fallen. The pain in his arm throbbed beneath the torn fabric of his sleeve, but he gritted his teeth and pressed on, refusing to let the day's humiliation show in his step. He had learned long ago that pride was sometimes the only armor a man could afford. Home for Eldon was a modest apartment on the quiet end of Jefferson Street, 3 blocks from the park. The walk took him past rows of weather-beaten houses and small front yards, the kind of neighborhood where folks nodded politely but rarely asked questions. Today, as he passed, a woman raking her lawn gave him a startled look at the sight of blood on his arm. Eldon just dipped his head in silent greeting and kept going, determined to reach the safety of his own door. The key trembled in his fingers as he unlocked the apartment. Inside, the air was cool and still, tinged with the scent of old books and the faintest trace of pipe tobacco, a habit Eldon had abandoned years ago, but whose memory lingered. The decor was sparse, but every item spoke of a life lived fully and quietly. On the mantel above the old gas heater sat a folded American flag, its stars bright against the faded blue, protected in a glass triangle case. Next to it rested a pair of dog tags, scratched and dulled by decades of use, and a seafaring knife whose blade still gleamed beneath a thin film of oil. A dusty shadow box hung nearby, its glass pane etched with the words, honor, courage, commitment. Eldon lowered himself into his favorite chair by the window with a tired grunt. The silence was companionable, almost comforting. A brown mutt with white paws, Charlie, lifted his head from a tattered dog bed in the corner and patted over, tail wagging. Eldon managed a weak smile as Charlie sniffed his wounded arm, whining softly. "I'm all right, boy. Just a scrape. You should see the other guy," Eldon joked, giving Charlie a gentle pat on the head. He placed the broken cane on the table, next to a small toolkit. Fixing things had always been Eldon's way of coping, but the split wood looked beyond simple repair this time. He sighed and reached for a clean rag, wetting it at the kitchen sink. As he dabbed at the blood, the sting bit through his resolve, but he kept working in silence, methodical, almost ritualistic. He'd cleaned up much worse in the old days. In the muted light of the living room, Eldon's gaze fell on the framed black and white photograph that hung above his television. It showed a much younger version of himself, upright and proud in crisp navy dress blues, standing beside a fresh-faced sailor with a crooked grin. "Avery," Eldon whispered, his finger tracing the edge of the glass. Memories flickered at the edge of his mind, and for a moment he was somewhere else entirely. He heard the rumble of distant artillery, the snap of gunfire, the shouts of men in the heat of battle. The picture blurred, replaced by a flash of the past. Iraq, 2003. The memory came in fragments. An explosion, dirt flying, acrid smoke burning his lungs. Eldon dragging 3 wounded men through fire and chaos, hands slick with blood, the world narrowing to the desperate will to survive and save. He remembered the fear, but also the clarity that came with action, the way the world focused down to a single, unwavering purpose. "They don't build quiet like this anymore," Eldon murmured, the words almost a prayer. He rapped his knuckles softly against the shadow box on the shelf, its contents glinting in the fading afternoon light. Inside, the Navy Cross, his most closely guarded secret, lay nestled in blue velvet. Few who passed him in the park would ever guess at the weight of that small, silent honor. The memories receded, replaced by the drone of the news on his old television. Eldon turned up the volume with the remote, needing the sound to fill the quiet. The local anchor's voice was somber. "Viral outrage in Memorial Park today, as footage emerges of an elderly man assaulted in broad daylight." The screen flickered, showing shaky cell phone video, the moment of impact, the jeers of the teenagers, the crowd's hesitation. The camera lingered on Eldon's fall, the cane snapping, blood blooming red against the concrete. Eldon watched his own humiliation in silence. The room suddenly colder. The phone on the counter buzzed, an old flip phone with duct tape across the back. The display flashed a name, Avery, Rhett M.A. 2. Eldon stared at it for a long moment, thumb hovering over the answer button, but he didn't press it, not yet. He closed the phone and set it aside, not ready for words, not ready for comfort. He moved about the apartment, feeding Charlie and tidying the kitchen, letting the small acts of routine calm his nerves. He boiled water for tea, the kettle whistling sharply, and poured himself a mug. The simple ritual, the feel of the warm ceramic in his hands, was grounding, a reminder that some things in life could still be controlled even when dignity felt stolen. Night crept in, shadows lengthening on the walls, turning the room to muted gold and deep blue. Eldon sat in his chair, tea cooling on the side table, and watched as the news cycle replayed the clip, each time stirring a new wave of anger and sadness in his chest. But beneath it all, another feeling began to grow, something he'd buried long ago, a quiet resolve. The sense that A line had been crossed, and could not simply be ignored. Charlie nudged his knee with a cold nose, seeking reassurance. Eldon scratched behind the dog's ears, murmuring softly. They think they know what toughness looks like, huh? Never seen the real thing, most of them. Maybe it's time someone taught them a lesson, without shouting, without fists. Just the old way, the right way. As the city settled into darkness and the world outside his window quieted, Eldon finally picked up his phone. He didn't call Avery yet, but he stared at the number long and hard, weighing what it would mean to break his own rule of solitude. He owed it to himself to rest, to heal, but he also owed something to the men he'd led, the code he'd lived by, and to the countless veterans whose stories were buried under silence and dust. The flip phone sat heavy in his palm, glowing faintly. On the news, a reporter said, "The video has already sparked outrage online, with many calling for justice and respect for our nation's veterans. Officials are reviewing the footage for possible charges." Eldon snorted. "Charges? That's not how this gets fixed," he said to Charlie, his eyes hardening with a purpose the world had nearly forgotten. Outside, the city was just another hum of distant engines and the faint echo of laughter from a bar down the block. But inside, in that small, humble apartment, something old and powerful stirred, a current of quiet strength that could not be filmed or tweeted, but would soon ripple out in ways no one expected. As Eldon turned off the TV and sat in the deepening dark, he felt the weight of the day settle across his shoulders. Still, he did not shrink beneath it. He had carried heavier burdens, and he knew, without words, without any need for spectacle, that the fight for respect never truly ended. It simply changed form. Tomorrow would come, and with it, the call that would set everything in motion. Night pressed in around Eldon's modest apartment, the city's distant glow flickering through the threadbare curtains. Charlie, his loyal mutt, curled up at Eldon's feet, eyes following every movement, ears twitching to every sound. The flip phone sat on the table like a loaded question, Avery's name still glowing faintly on the screen. Eldon ignored it for now. He needed space, needed to remember who he'd been before the aches, before the cane, before the world started treating him as if he was invisible. He reached for the framed photograph above the television, the one that never gathered dust because his hands touched it almost daily. Black and white, creased at the corners, the image was crisp. Two young men in navy dress blues. Eldon, jaw square and eyes bright, stood with an arm around Avery, who looked almost too young to be in uniform at all. They grinned as if the world hadn't yet shown them its teeth. In that frozen moment, hope was easy. Eldon traced a finger along the glass, his calloused skin snagging on the chips along the frame. As his gaze fixed on the photo, the walls of the apartment faded away, replaced by another time, another place, half a world away. He could still feel the furnace heat of Iraq, 2003, sand like razors in his mouth, adrenaline humming through his veins. The night air there had been thick with tension, the kind that crawled down your spine and made sleep impossible. His unit was hunkered down in a makeshift camp outside the city, sandbags and scrap metal the only thing standing between them and chaos. Avery was there, younger, jumpy but game, always watching Eldon for silent cues. The memory splintered, explosion, so loud it shook the earth, dirt and fire raining from the sky. Men shouting, the world spun, sharp and wild, as rounds tore through the dark. Instinct took over. Eldon didn't think. He moved, crawling toward the fire zone, where screams rose above the gunfire. One by one he pulled men from the wreckage. Corporal Hayes, blood streaming from his leg. Petty Officer Wilkins, dazed, barely conscious. Private Dunn, face ashen, clutching his ribs. Each man heavier than the last. Eldon's own ears rang, heart pounding so hard he tasted blood. He could feel the heat licking at his back as he dragged them, his uniform scorched and torn, knuckles raw from shattered concrete. Avery was beside him then, face ghostly pale but hands steady. "Chief, we can't stay. This place is going to blow." Eldon didn't answer. He just nodded, shoved Avery toward safety, and went back for the last man, refusing to leave anyone behind. That was the code. Unspoken, but binding. By the time he carried Private Ramirez clear, his muscles screamed in protest, but he didn't stop until every one of his men was accounted for. Back in the camp, medics swarmed the wounded. Eldon slumped to his knees, arms shaking, the stench of smoke and cordite thick in his lungs. Avery dropped beside him, gripping his shoulder. "You saved them, Chief. You did it." Eldon only nodded. He stared at his blood-slicked hands, breathing hard, the world spinning. The medal would come later, but in that moment, all that mattered was the roll call. The relief when every name answered, battered but alive. The memory faded, replaced by 1,000 others. Quiet moments on the ship's deck at dawn, letters home scrawled in trembling hands, the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. Eldon remembered the feel of steel underfoot, the distant sound of waves slapping the hull, and the silence that came after a long day's work, the kind only sailors understood. He looked again at the shadow box on his wall, fingers tracing the edge. Inside, nestled among faded ribbons and commendations, sat his Navy Cross, a simple, shining thing that most people never saw. He'd never shown it off. For Eldon, the medal wasn't about glory. It was about the men he'd brought home, the brothers he'd buried, and the promise he'd kept, year after quiet year. As he tapped the glass, a voice echoed in his head. Avery's voice, younger, reverent. "They don't build quiet like this anymore, Chief." Eldon smiled, a weary kind of pride in his chest. Avery had been right. The world moved too fast now, too loud. The old values, duty, silence, humility, felt like relics from another era. He turned from the wall, settling back into his worn recliner. On the TV, the story about Memorial Park played again, this time with talking heads debating outrage and respect. Eldon muted the volume, preferring the steady hum of the city outside. He wasn't interested in debate. He knew who he was, even if the world had forgotten. His eyes flicked to the flip phone, the message from Avery still unread. "You good, Chief? Want me to swing by?" Eldon hesitated. Part of him wanted to answer, to say he was fine, that the old man could still handle himself. But another part knew that silence wasn't always strength. Sometimes. Reaching out was the bravest act. He stood and crossed to the kitchen, filling Charlie's bowl with kibble. The dog nuzzled his hand in thanks, the touch grounding. Eldon poured himself a glass of water, hands still trembling ever so slightly, and leaned against the counter, staring out the small window at the night. The moonlight caught on the edge of his Navy Cross, the reflection glinting across the room. He let the memories wash over him, not just of battles and bravery, but of all the quiet, in-between moments. The letters from home, the jokes traded at midnight watch, the silent tears shed for lost friends. He remembered a time when respect was earned and kept, not something that could be torn away by a teenager's shove or a viral video. But even now, decades removed from the heat of battle, the lesson remained. Dignity was not about standing tall in public. It was about living true in private, knowing what you'd done, who you'd loved, and what you'd sacrificed. That was something no one could steal. He returned to the living room, dog at his heels, and sat down again, gazing at the shadow box. His knuckles tapped the glass, a silent promise to the men he'd served with. Inside him, something steeled. Today, he'd been knocked down, shamed before strangers. But tomorrow, he would stand again. Not for himself, but for every man and woman who had ever worn the uniform and been forgotten. As the night deepened, Eldon closed his eyes. The pain in his arm dulled, replaced by a stubborn sense of purpose. He would not let this insult pass. But whatever he did next, he'd do it the way he'd always done. Quiet, clean, and with the honor of the old code. Outside, the world kept spinning. But inside, in that tiny apartment filled with memories and medals, a storm gathered. Eldon Briggs was not finished. Not yet. The apartment was cloaked in the hush of early morning. The street outside was still, a few headlights drifting past and then vanishing. Eldon Briggs sat in his recliner, the shadow box glowing softly in the dawn light, his Navy Cross catching the first golden streaks that cut through the curtains. Charlie lay curled at his feet, breathing deep, oblivious to the storm swirling in Eldon's mind. Eldon's elbow ached, and every movement sent a sharp reminder of the day before. But he felt something else, too, a burning, righteous energy that came only when a line was crossed. He'd spent his life living by an old code. Don't invite trouble, but don't ever back down from it when it finds you. The viral video played again on the morning news, this time with somber music and a graphic that read, "Outrage in Pensacola, who is the old man?" The anchor's words faded as Eldon muted the set. He'd heard enough. Heard the concern, the demands for justice, the shallow apologies from city officials. What no one understood was that he didn't want pity, and he certainly didn't want to be a symbol for cable news. He wanted respect. Nothing more, nothing less. The kind that came from understanding what a man had carried and what he'd endured for the sake of others. Eldon reached for his flip phone and flipped it open. Avery's message from last night glowed quietly. "You good, Chief? Want me to swing by?" Underneath, a missed call. He hesitated, staring at the keys. Pride and old habits made his fingers stiff. For years, he'd never needed anyone. Not really. Not since the Navy. Not since that last posting in the Gulf. The men who'd served under him had scattered to the winds, some lost to memory, some to the bottle, some still fighting their own wars. Avery, though, Avery had always been the one to check in. With a sigh, Eldon pressed the call button. It rang only once. Avery's voice came through, clear and strong, with a touch of gravel that age couldn't erase. "Chief? Been waiting on you?" Eldon let the silence stretch just a heartbeat longer than necessary. He wanted to sound steady, to show that the day's humiliation hadn't broken him. But there was a tremor in his words he couldn't quite disguise. "Avery, it's time." A pause. On the other end, Avery understood immediately. No need for explanations. "You sure?" Avery asked quietly, the weight of the question thick in the air. There was no judgment in his tone, only loyalty. Eldon nodded, even though Avery couldn't see him. "Quiet, clean, and respectful. That's all I ask. No scenes, no retribution. I just want them to understand." Avery let out a slow breath, the sound familiar and grounding. "Of course, Chief. That's the only way we do things. I've got eyes. I'll bring the right team." Eldon's grip on the phone tightened. "No one else needs to get hurt, Avery. This isn't about payback. It's about the code, about reminding folks how to treat people, even if they don't wear the uniform anymore." On the other end, Avery's reply was instant. "Understood. You have my word." A trace of steel entered his voice, as if he were back on the deck of a ship, calling out orders to the younger men. "I'll handle it. You just rest up, Chief." The call ended, but Eldon sat for a moment, phone still pressed to his ear. In that brief exchange, 1,000 unspoken memories passed between the two men, of danger and loyalty, and what it meant to have someone's back when it mattered. The years melted away. He wasn't just an old man in a chair anymore. He was a leader again, a man whose words still carried weight. He stared out the window, watching as the first sunlight crept across the city, stirring life into the empty streets. In the distance, he could hear the faint whistle of a train and the bark of a stray dog. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly, feeling something in his chest ease. He had done his part. Now it was up to Avery and his people. Avery hung up and immediately switched gears. He was no longer just Avery, retired master-at-arms. He was now the man who others trusted to get things done, the invisible hand that smoothed over rough situations before they made the news. In the years since leaving active duty, Avery had found his place working private security, occasionally helping out at the VA, always keeping tabs on the men he considered family. He dialed a number, crisp and efficient. "Get the team together. We've got an old debt to settle. Quiet and respectful. You know the drill. This isn't about intimidation. It's about education." Across town, men and women who had worn the uniform picked up their own phones, recognizing Avery's tone and the rare urgency behind it. Some were old shipmates, others were young, but all of them understood the unspoken order. A brother had been wronged, and that meant the whole family was mobilizing. Eldon spent the day tending to his wound, Charlie never leaving his side. He kept the news off, not wanting to see his own face on a screen. Instead, he put on a record. Soft jazz, something that reminded him of better days, and tried to lose himself in the rhythm of ordinary life. But beneath the music, he felt a restless current, the energy of a storm brewing just beyond his door. In the afternoon, a package arrived at his doorstep. A new cane, sturdy and polished, with a brass Navy anchor on the handle. No note, just a quiet gesture from someone who knew how to say, "I've got you," without words. Eldon smiled and shook his head, a tear pricking at his eye. As evening approached, Avery checked in again. "Just wanted you to know, we're set. No one's going to make a scene. We'll handle it quiet, Chief. You have my word." Eldon's voice was soft, but resolute. "Thank you, Avery. I just want them to see, to understand. That's all." Avery replied, "They will. Rest easy tonight." And so, as night fell over Pensacola, a sense of calm settled over Eldon's apartment. Charlie lay beside him, tail wagging as if he sensed the change. Eldon ran a hand over the Navy anchor on his new cane, feeling the weight of history, of duty, of brotherhood. He understood now. He wasn't alone, not really. The code he lived by was still alive in others, men and women who would answer the call without hesitation. All it took was a single word, a quiet request from someone who had once led them through fire. Eldon closed his eyes, letting the music and the memories wash over him. Tomorrow, something would shift in the city. Not because of anger, not because of vengeance, but because of honor. Because the old ways still mattered, even in a world that had almost forgotten them. And in that knowledge, Eldon found a rare kind of peace. The Florida night was heavy with the scent of rain, though none had fallen yet. Humidity clung to every breath, making the city seem closer, every noise amplified. The lights of Pensacola flickered against low-hanging clouds, neon buzzing over strip malls and parking lots. On the edge of town, where the concrete gave way to rough patches of grass and half-lit alleys, 3 teenagers moved like ghosts behind a row of dumpsters. Their laughter was forced now, brittle, a bad echo of the confidence they'd displayed in the park. They lingered by the loading dock of a closed discount store, boards nailed across the windows, a faded sign reading, "Family Bargain." The skateboard of the tallest boy clattered on the uneven pavement, drawing a sharp look from his friend. "Keep it down, man," the second teen hissed. "Someone's gonna call the cops. My mom's already tripping about that video." The third, the one with the messy hair and the iPhone, now tucked out of sight, shifted his weight uneasily. He glanced down the alley for the 100th time, the thrill of yesterday's prank soured by the weight of a city's anger. The video had exploded overnight. His DMs were full of strangers cursing him, calling him coward, bully, punk. He'd never been on the wrong end of a million eyes before. The only sound now was the buzz of insects and the distant whine of sirens moving elsewhere in the city. Then, in the glow from a security light, a black SUV glided into the lot. Quiet, deliberate, headlights cutting through the gloom. It didn't rush or lurch. It just arrived, as if it belonged there. The SUV rolled to a stop. Doors opened with military precision. 3 figures stepped out, their movements casual but unmistakably purposeful. They wore plainclothes, jeans, polos, weathered boots, but something about them broadcast strength. The first was a man in his 40s, hair clipped short, an old service tattoo barely visible under his sleeve. The second, broader, carried himself with a quiet authority. He looked like someone who never had to raise his voice to get his point across. The third was younger, a woman, but her stare was just as sharp and direct. All 3 paused in front of the teens, sizing them up. The tallest boy tried to play it cool. "Yo, who are you? You guys lost or something?" The man with the tattoo ignored the question. He stepped forward, voice even, calm. "We're not here to fight. We're here to explain who you shoved." A hush fell over the alley, thicker than the Florida heat. The woman set down a small folder, her hands steady. The other man leaned against the SUV, arms crossed, eyes locked on the trio. There was no menace, just the confidence of people who had faced worse than a few scared kids behind a strip mall. The iPhone boy looked from one face to the next. We didn't know, okay? We thought he was just some random old guy." The woman's lips twitched in a half smile, humorless. "Not just some random old guy. Chief Eldon Briggs, U.S. Navy, retired. He's the reason some of us are alive today." The broad man stepped forward, rolling up his sleeve. On his forearm, a Marine trident glistened in dark ink. He jabbed a finger at it, then at the kids. "You see this? Chief Briggs trained me. That man earned more respect than you'll ever understand." The words landed hard. The teens shifted, the bravado leaking out of them like air from a punctured tire. For the first time, they saw the situation for what it was. Not a threat, not a shakedown, but a reckoning. The man with the tattoo handed the folder to the iPhone boy. "Read this." Inside were copies, commendations, photos, military records, newspaper clippings yellowed with age. Eldon Briggs on a deck in the Persian Gulf, arms slung around younger sailors. Headlines: Local hero, awarded Navy Cross. Veteran saves lives in Iraq, firefight. The teens fell silent as they read, the weight of history pressing down on them. The woman pulled out her phone, swiping to a page with a government seal. "Here. Medal of Valor nomination. His name's right there. Saved 5 people from a burning vehicle under enemy fire." She let them read it for themselves, letting the facts do the work. No one raised their voice. No threats were made. Just eye contact. Honest, unwavering, impossible to escape. The teens, squirming, finally looked away. The guilt gnawed at them, deeper than any insult on social media. "We didn't know," one whispered, his voice cracking. "Now you do," said the broad man, his tone gentle but firm. "Act like it. You don't have to like us, but you will show respect, not because we demand it, but because it's the right thing to do." The SUV team didn't wait for an answer. They closed the folder, returned it to the woman, and began to walk away. But before climbing in, the man with the tattoo turned back. "Listen," he said quietly, "you get one mistake. That's all. You want to make it right? Find him. Apologize. You don't do it for us. You do it because one day you'll be old too. And how you treat people now? That's what you'll remember." They left the teens there, stunned and quiet, standing in the pool of light behind the family bargain. The SUV slipped away, tires whispering on the wet asphalt, vanishing into the city's pulse. The 3 veterans didn't say much on the drive. There was no victory, just a sense that something old and sacred had been defended, without violence, without spectacle, just by standing tall. Back behind the strip mall, the 3 teens stood for a long time. The folder passed between them. For the first time since yesterday, the truth was undeniable. The old man wasn't just a stranger. He was someone's mentor, someone's hero, someone who'd carried the weight of a country on his shoulders without ever asking for recognition. Finally, the iPhone boy spoke, voice shaking. "We have to find him. I have to say I'm sorry. This isn't who I want to be." The others nodded. Their world felt different now, smaller, but somehow bigger too. Their choices suddenly mattered. With the weight of the folder in their hands, in the memory of those calm, unwavering eyes in their minds, the lesson was clear. Respect wasn't given. It was earned, and sometimes demanded, quietly, by those who had already paid the price. The night closed in around them, heavy with possibility and regret. Pensacola awoke to a dawn that felt different, even if most people couldn't name why. There was a new energy in the city, a charge in the air that hinted something important had shifted. Maybe it was the way word had spread overnight, stories flying faster than rumor, passed from neighbor to neighbor, through group chats, church circles, and the ever-churning social media feeds. Some saw only the video, the moment an old man was shoved, his dignity battered, his blood left on the street. Others saw the response, the Navy salute, the silent crowd, the way a single act of honor could ripple outward and shake a community awake. But for 3 teenagers, sleep had been impossible. The folder the veterans left with them was now dog-eared and fingerprinted, its contents poured over again and again in a cheap, anxious motel room near the water. None of them had said much. What could they say? The weight of their actions pressed down, heavier than anything they'd ever known. The iPhone boy, his name was Ryan, kept staring at the front page of the folder, at a newspaper photo of Eldon Briggs standing tall, medals pinned to his chest, surrounded by men half his age, but looking every bit their equal. The headlines felt like accusations. Local hero, decorated. Navy chief saves lives in Iraq. Quiet valor, veterans' deeds remembered. Ryan's stomach twisted. The memory of Eldon's shock, his stumble, his blood on the street replayed in his mind until he felt sick. His friends, Marcus and Tyler, were equally subdued. Marcus, usually the loudest, hadn't made a joke since the encounter behind the strip mall. Tyler kept muttering, "What are we supposed to do now?" As if saying it out loud would conjure an answer. The sun was barely up when there was a knock at their door. No pounding, no threat, just 3 measured taps. For a moment, the boys froze. Ryan's heart hammered in his chest, but he forced himself to open the door. Standing outside was the woman from last night, the one with the sharp eyes and calm voice. She looked them over, her gaze steady. In one hand, she held a manila envelope. "Don't worry," she said, voice low but clear. "I'm not here to make a scene. I just want you to understand what comes next." She stepped inside, closed the door gently behind her, and sat on the edge of the battered motel bed. She didn't scold or raise her voice. Instead, she opened the envelope and placed its contents on the table, a copy of Eldon's official Navy commendation record, rows and rows of citations, each one a story of sacrifice and courage. "I want you to look at these," she said, her tone even, almost gentle. "Read them out loud, every word." The boys took turns, their voices faltering as they recited tales of bravery in the Persian Gulf, evacuations under fire, years of service logged in ships in distant cities. There were letters from families Eldon had helped, notes from officers who trusted him with their lives. Each sentence was a reminder of a life lived not for attention, but for the quiet protection of others. When they finished, the woman produced her phone, scrolling to a government webpage. "This," she said, turning the screen so they could see, "is the Medal of Valor nomination. Eldon's name is right there. He pulled his men from a burning convoy in Iraq, saved their lives. He never boasted, never asked for anything in return." Ryan's throat was tight. "We didn't know. I swear, we didn't know." She held up a hand, silencing him. "It's not about what you knew. It's about what you do now." The boys fell silent. Outside, the city was waking up, a dog barking, a car engine revving, the world continuing on as if nothing monumental had happened. But inside the small room, something fundamental was shifting. She fixed each of them with a look, her words deliberate. "We're not here for revenge. Chief Briggs didn't ask us to hurt you. He asked us to teach you. That's why I'm here. That's why the men who showed up last night were calm. They didn't threaten you. They showed you the truth and expected you to act with honor. That's how respect works." Tyler, his face pale, stared at his hands. "How do we fix this?" The woman's answer was simple. "You start by owning it. You apologize. Not for the cameras, not because you're afraid, but because it's right. And then you do something that matters. You stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. You show that you learned something." Marcus nodded, swallowing hard. "We get it. We really do." She let the silence stretch, reading their faces. "I believe you, but believing is easy. Living it, that's the work. Don't waste what you've been given. Chief Briggs survived war. He survived loss. He survived being forgotten. And when the world pushed him down, he stood back up. What you do next, that's your story now." She gathered the papers and left the envelope behind. At the door, she paused and looked back. "One last thing. There are plenty of people watching you now. Don't let them define you by your worst moment. Prove them wrong." She closed the door, her footsteps fading down the hall. The room was silent for a long time. When the boys finally spoke, it wasn't to make excuses. They made a plan. They would go to the VA hospital, where veterans volunteered, asked to see Eldon Briggs, and apologize, face to face. No cameras, no audience. They would offer to help however they could. The conversation was awkward, their voices breaking with nerves, but it was honest. They dressed in their best clothes, palms sweaty, hearts pounding. The walk to the hospital felt like a march, each step a reminder of the choices that led them there. On the way, they passed Memorial Park. There, a group of veterans were already gathering, a quiet show of unity and support. The teens hesitated, feeling the eyes of men and women who understood honor in a way they were just beginning to grasp. At the VA, a nurse listened to their request and disappeared into the back. The boys waited in tense silence. When Eldon appeared, walking with his new Navy-anchored cane, face-lined but strong, the boys stood. For a moment, none of them spoke. Finally, Ryan stepped forward, voice trembling but steady. "Sir, we're sorry. What we did was wrong. We can't take it back, but we want to do better. However we can." Eldon looked them over, eyes sharp and searching, weighing the truth of their words. He nodded once, not smiling, not scowling, just acknowledging. Takes guts to say that. More than most have. He turned to the nurse. "You got chores need doing?" She grinned, pointing to a stack of boxes. The boys followed her, rolling up their sleeves, learning, by action, not just words, what it meant to serve. Back in Memorial Park, word of the apology spread quietly. No video, no spectacle, just a new story whispered through the city. The story of 3 boys who learned what it meant to stand at attention, and the old man who taught them, without ever raising his voice. Morning in Pensacola brought a different kind of hush to Memorial Park, the sort that lingers just before a storm or just after a collective sigh. Dew clung to the grass, catching light as the sun lifted itself over the horizon. There was no brass band or parade, no announcement over loudspeakers. But as the city woke, people quietly began to gather at the place where, just days before, an old man's dignity had been shattered and then mended. Eldon Briggs wasn't expecting a crowd. In truth, he had resisted the idea of returning to the park at all. His preference was for quiet mornings, coffee steaming in his hands, while Charlie, his faithful mutt, dozed at his feet. But Avery had called that morning, his tone gentle, insistent, with the sort of gravity that left little room for argument. "Come to the park, Chief. There's something you should see." Eldon had sighed, set his mug aside, and reached for his new cane, the one with the brass Navy anchor at the handle. He put on his cleanest shirt, pulled his ball cap low, and let Charlie lead the way, the dog's tail wagging as if he sensed something important in the air. They approached the entrance to Memorial Park, just as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the oak branches. Eldon was surprised to see a cluster of people already waiting, standing in small, quiet groups. Some wore ball caps or faded uniforms. Others held flags folded carefully in their arms. There were children clinging to their parents, teenagers standing awkwardly at the edge of the crowd, and elders seated on benches, faces solemn but proud. Eldon almost turned back, but Avery was there at the gate, hand raised in greeting. He gave Eldon a look that brooked no refusal, one part camaraderie, one part command. Eldon smiled, shaking his head. "Can't say no to you, Avery, not after all these years." They walked in together, Charlie padding alongside. As they moved down the park's main path, the crowd parted silently. Heads turned. Some people nodded in quiet recognition, others simply stepped aside, making space for a man who, until recently, had walked these grounds unnoticed. Near the center of the park, by the memorial wall, etched with the names of the fallen, a line of veterans stood at attention. Men and women of every age and background, some in full uniform, others in jeans and t-shirts, medals pinned to their chests, ribbons gleaming in the morning light. At the front stood a man with silver hair and a crisp blue jacket, Commander Harrison, head of the local VFW post. As Eldon and Avery approached, Commander Harrison stepped forward. The park fell into a respectful silence. No need for microphones or speeches. Every face in the crowd watched as Harrison reached into a velvet bag and produced a new cane, polished walnut with a gleaming Navy insignia inlaid at the top. He extended the cane to Eldon with both hands, as if offering a sword to a knight. "Chief Briggs, on behalf of the veterans of Pensacola and every citizen who calls this city home, we honor you, not just for your service, but for your example. This is for you." Eldon accepted the cane, his hands trembling. He blinked, fighting to keep his composure as he looked around. It was impossible to ignore the respect in the eyes that met his. He glanced at Avery, who simply nodded, pride written in every line of his face. The crowd remained silent as Eldon tested the cane, finding it perfectly balanced. He looked up and spoke, his voice steady, carrying just enough for those closest to hear. "Didn't ask for all this, but thank you. Means more than you know." Commander Harrison saluted. One by one, the veterans along the path followed suit, each raising a hand in a salute that cut through the hush like a bell. Some civilians, uncertain at first, copied the gesture, hands pressed to hearts or brows. Children watched, wide-eyed, as adults showed respect in a language older than words. From the back of the crowd, a ripple began. A round of applause, gentle at first, then swelling as others joined in. Eldon stood, caught in the moment, feeling the old ache in his arm and the older ache in his heart soften. For the first time in years, he felt truly seen, not as a relic or a victim, but as a living example of endurance and quiet honor. Avery leaned in. "You taught us more than you know, Chief. Today, people remember." Nearby, Ryan, Marcus, and Tyler, the three teenagers, stood awkwardly, hats in their hands. The apology they had delivered at the VA was known only to a few, but word had gotten around. Today, they joined the crowd, not as outcasts, but as young men learning the cost and value of respect. As the applause faded, Ryan stepped forward, voice trembling but clear. "Thank you, sir, for everything." Eldon met the boy's gaze, and for a moment the space between them was filled not by shame, but by the possibility of change. He nodded, acknowledging not just the apology, but the effort to do better. Commander Harrison spoke again, his voice full of authority and warmth. "Today, we remember that honor isn't about medals or parades. It's about the way we treat each other when nobody's watching, and the way we stand together when the world finally does." The gathering relaxed, people drifting closer, conversations blossoming in low, respectful tones. A local news crew filmed from a distance, careful not to intrude. Families took photos in front of the memorial wall. Veterans embraced, stories exchanged in the language of shared struggle. As the morning wore on, Eldon found himself at the center of gentle celebration. Children approached with questions, parents introduced themselves, offering thanks or recalling relatives who'd served. Several younger veterans shook Eldon's hand, asking for advice or simply wanting to share a moment with someone who'd carried the torch before them. Avery stayed close, acting as a quiet buffer, but Eldon never once looked overwhelmed. The burden of years and recent pain seemed lighter. For a few hours, Memorial Park was not just a place of memory. It was a living community, united by respect. As the event drew to a close, Commander Harrison addressed the crowd. "Let's never forget, if we want to be worthy of those who came before us, we honor them not just with words, but with action. Today is a reminder for all of us." Eldon shook hands, accepted hugs, and let Charlie be petted by children who giggled at his wagging tail. As the sun reached its zenith, the crowd dispersed, but the feeling remained. People left Memorial Park with more than memories. They left with a lesson in their hearts. Eldon lingered a moment longer, watching as families gathered at the playground and veterans sat in quiet conversation beneath the oaks. He gripped his new cane, feeling the smooth wood, the inlaid anchor cool beneath his palm. As he looked out at the city he'd served, he realized something profound. The world could be cruel, but it could also be kind. Respect lost could be respect regained, one quiet act at a time. He tipped his cap to the sky, a silent salute to those who'd gone before. As he and Charlie walked home, heads turned again, not out of pity, but out of genuine admiration. Eldon was no longer invisible. In a world full of noise, his quiet dignity had spoken loud enough for everyone to hear. Within 48 hours, the video from Memorial Park was everywhere. Not just in Pensacola or even Florida, but across the country. 1,000 screens in diners, airports, living rooms, and high school auditoriums flickered with the same images. A frail old man knocked to the street, then helped up, then saluted. What had started as a moment of cruelty, caught for mockery, had become a national lesson in respect and redemption. The ripple was unstoppable. Social media exploded first, as it always did. At first, anger and outrage surged. The original video, re-uploaded with grainy captions and commentaries, sparked furious arguments. about youth and respect, about bystanders, about the invisible wounds veterans carried. But as the fuller story emerged, the return salute, the silent dignity, the quiet response of the Navy men who arrived to educate, not punish, the conversation shifted. People began to share their own stories, thousands of them. On a Facebook group for Navy veterans, someone posted a side-by-side photo. Eldon Briggs in his dress blues, and Eldon on the asphalt, blood on his elbow, but dignity in his eyes. The post was captioned, "They don't make them like Chief Briggs anymore. Maybe it's time we try." Within hours, the post had more than 50,000 shares and comments from every corner of the country. In a high school in Nebraska, a history teacher played the video before class, then set aside the textbook. "Let's talk about what this means," he said. Students who rarely spoke up began to share stories of their own families, grandparents who had fought, parents who had served, the lessons that stuck long after uniforms were folded away. At a church in Detroit, the Sunday sermon took a different turn. The pastor projected Eldon's image onto a screen above the pulpit, his voice resonant and warm. "There's a kind of strength that doesn't shout," he said. "It stands up, even when the world knocks it down. Let us remember that honor isn't just a word, it's an action." The ripple reached deeper still. Veterans organizations across the U.S. took notice. Posts appeared on the American Legion's national website and in newsletters from the VFW and Vietnam Veterans of America. Leaders issued statements of support, not just for Eldon, but for every veteran who'd ever come home to indifference or disrespect. Memorial Park became a symbol, a stand-in for every town square where quiet heroes had been overlooked. In Pensacola, something remarkable happened at the schools. At the middle school attended by two of the boys from the incident, students and teachers gathered in the auditorium. The principal spoke softly, her voice full of empathy and challenge. "We all saw what happened," she said, "but what matters most is what we do now. Today, we're starting something new. Every assembly from now on will have an honor seat for a veteran, not because they ask for it, but because we owe it." The first honor seat was marked by a simple ribbon and a small card, reserved for those who served. Veterans in the community, many of whom had never set foot in the school, began to attend assemblies, sometimes in uniform, sometimes in jeans and baseball caps. Students shook their hands, asked questions, listened. Other schools in the district took notice, and soon the honor seat spread, first to the high school, then to other towns nearby, then further. Local news stations picked up the story, and it wasn't long before national outlets followed suit. A segment on Good Morning America showed footage of Eldon's walk through the park, the veterans' silent salute, the crowd's applause. The anchor's voice was soft, almost reverent. Sometimes it takes a moment of hardship to remind us who we are and what we owe to those who have carried the heaviest burdens. Letters began to arrive at Eldon's apartment. Not a few, not dozens, but hundreds. Handwritten cards from school children, formal thank yous from city councils, emails and gifts from complete strangers. Some shared stories of their own fathers and grandfathers. Others simply wrote, "Thank you for reminding us." One envelope, thick and heavy, came from a Navy unit stationed in Japan. Inside were signatures from every member of the crew, along with a patch, a challenge coin, and a simple message. "Once Navy, always Navy. You're never forgotten, Chief." Veterans groups in other cities organized tribute marches and community gatherings. In San Antonio, a parade that was originally planned for Memorial Day was renamed the Quiet Valor Walk. With a special moment of silence in Eldon's honor, in Portland, a mural appeared overnight on the side of an old warehouse. Eldon's profile, painted beneath a wave of blue, the word "respect" in bold block letters. The impact was personal, too. The three teenagers, now known by name and not just by deed, found themselves at the center of something much bigger than themselves. They kept volunteering at the VA, working not for show, but out of a sense of responsibility. With the help of Eldon and Avery, they organized a campaign called Stand Up, Step Forward, a simple project encouraging young people to look out for those who had served. The first project was modest. Repainting benches in Memorial Park, planting new trees, and cleaning up the plaques that bore the names of local heroes. But as word spread, Other young people joined in. The message was clear. One mistake did not have to define a life, but it could spark a change. In the weeks that followed, Eldon was invited to speak at schools, at city council meetings, even via Zoom to a class at the Naval Academy. Each time, he spoke quietly, refusing to bask in the spotlight. He talked about the men he'd served with, the values they'd taught him, and the strength it took to stand up without ever raising your voice. "You don't need a medal," he said. "You just need to do the right thing, even when nobody's watching." Avery stood by his side at most of these events, quietly proud. He noticed how Eldon's bearing had changed, not that he stood taller, but that the weight he'd carried seemed lighter, as if a nation's gratitude could ease the burden of long years. But perhaps the most powerful ripple was in the small, invisible acts that followed. Neighbors checked on elderly veterans. Strangers picked up the phone to call a grandfather they hadn't spoken to in months. Young people, emboldened by the story, began to push back when they saw disrespect. Online, in public, at school. One afternoon, Eldon returned home to find his porch covered in homemade cards. Thank yous from children, drawings of flags and salutes. Sometimes just a heart and the word hero. He knelt to pick them up, Charlie sniffing at his side, and for a moment tears filled his eyes. Not for the pain or the humiliation, but for the hope that somehow, in a world full of noise and haste, a single quiet act could remind people what dignity looked like. As the sun dipped low over Pensacola, the last light touched the names on Memorial Park's wall, and Eldon walked there one more time. He wasn't alone. Students, veterans, parents, ordinary people had gathered to sit in silence, a living ripple spreading across the grass. America had remembered, not just a single man, but the idea he stood for, that honor isn't given, it's lived. And in the quiet, in the space between tragedy and redemption, something enduring had been restored. Even as the country's attention shifted to the next story, the next outrage, and the next viral moment, the impact of what happened in Memorial Park continued to echo quietly, finding a home in the hearts of those who needed it most. But for Eldon Briggs, life returned to a version of normal. He was not seeking headlines or gratitude. In truth, he longed for peace, for the comforting routines that had shaped his days long before a thoughtless shove and a viral video had turned him into a symbol. On a sun-drenched morning, Eldon sat at his kitchen table, the new cane with the brass Navy anchor resting beside him. Charlie sprawled at his feet, occasionally lifting his head to watch the world through the open window. The room was quiet, except for the soft tick of the clock and the gentle hum of traffic outside. Eldon looked at the stack of letters on the table. Thank yous from strangers, invitations to speak, cards from children across the country. Each one was a reminder that his story had traveled far beyond the boundaries of Pensacola, awakening something in people who might otherwise have kept walking, just like those bystanders that day in the park. But Eldon's mind was on something deeper, a lesson he'd learned not only from his years in uniform, but from the quiet, everyday courage required to simply endure. He thought about the men and women he'd served with, those who never made it home, those who came back, changed, and those who, like him, learned to navigate a world that often forgot the meaning of sacrifice. He remembered, too, the teenagers who had come to apologize. He'd seen the look in their eyes, a mixture of fear, regret, and the first flicker of understanding. He saw himself in them, long ago, before the Navy, before war and duty had etched lines into his face and calluses onto his hands. He knew then that redemption was possible, not through grand gestures, but through the willingness to stand up, admit wrong, and change. The phone buzzed, another message from Avery, checking in, sharing news of new honor seats at a school in another state. Eldon smiled, grateful for the connection, grateful that the old bonds still held. Later that afternoon, Eldon returned to Memorial Park. This time, he didn't come alone. He was joined by Avery, by the 3 boys who had learned their lesson the hard way, and by a scattering of neighbors and veterans who had made the park their own. They sat on benches or stood beneath the shade of the oaks, talking quietly or simply soaking in the gentle peace of the place. A local news crew arrived, hoping for a quote or a dramatic soundbite. Eldon greeted them with a nod, but declined to say much on camera. When pressed, he simply said, "This isn't my story alone. It's every veteran's story. It's every person who's ever tried to do right, even when nobody's looking." When the cameras switched off, Eldon spoke to the small group gathered around him. He didn't lecture, he didn't scold. Instead, he told them about a lesson that had taken a lifetime to learn. "True strength isn't loud," he began, his voice clear but quiet, carrying in the open air. "It isn't about fighting back, about getting even. I've seen men try to prove how tough they are, but the real measure of a person, of a country, is how you treat someone who can't do anything for you, how you stand up when it'd be easier to stay silent." He gestured to the memorial wall, to the names carved there forever. "A lot of folks here gave everything for this country. Most of them never got a parade. Most never wanted one. They just wanted to know that what they did mattered, that somebody cared enough to remember." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the group. "When you walk by someone like me, someone older, someone who looks like their best years are behind them, I hope you'll think twice before judging. You never know what battles they've fought. Sometimes, the strongest people are the quietest ones, carrying their scars with dignity." The teenagers listened, heads bowed. Avery stood nearby, his pride and respect evident in every line of his posture. Eldon continued, "We live in a world that moves fast, that forgets easy. But respect, real respect, is what keeps us grounded. It's not just for the uniform, or the medal, or the flag. It's for each other. If we lose that, we lose what makes us a community, a country, a family." He looked at Ryan, Marcus, and Tyler. "You made a mistake, but you owned up to it. That takes guts. What matters now is how you live, what you do next. Don't let your worst moment define you. Make this right, not just for me, but for anyone who's ever been overlooked." The boys nodded, emotion clear in their faces. They had started volunteering regularly at the VA, carrying forward the lesson they'd learned, not just with their words, but with their actions. A child approached, her hand clutching a drawing, a crayon sketch of Eldon standing tall, a line of kids saluting him. She handed it to him shyly. Eldon knelt down, accepting the drawing with care. "Thank you," he whispered. "That means more than any medal I ever got." As the sun began to set, the group at Memorial Park grew quiet. There were no speeches, no ceremonies, just a shared sense that something important had happened, that they were part of a story larger than themselves. Eldon walked the path home slowly, Charlie trotting ahead. He passed the playground, the benches, the honor seat now permanently marked with a small brass plaque. As he walked, people greeted him, not with pity, but with genuine respect. The city felt warmer, somehow more connected. That evening, Eldon sat by his window and watched the last of the day's lights spill across the street. He thought of the old Navy saying, "Honor, courage, commitment." He realized those words weren't just for battlefields or ships at sea. They were for every day, for every person willing to do what's right. He wanted no fame, no statue, no more attention. All he hoped was that people would remember, not just his story, but the story of every quiet hero, every person whose dignity could inspire a change, no matter how small. As darkness settled, Eldon raised his mug to the memory of old friends and new beginnings. He knew the world would keep spinning, new challenges would come. But something had shifted, for him, for Pensacola, and for every corner of America that had taken this lesson to heart. And as the stars blinked on over Memorial Park, a quiet promise lingered in the air. So long as there were those willing to stand up, to speak out, and to honor the quiet strength of their neighbors, dignity and respect would never be forgotten. If you believe men like Eldon Briggs deserve to be seen, respected, and remembered, share his story. Subscribe for more stories that America needs to hear.